I think we are all learning to say, how do we create this vibrant Jewish community with the multiplicity of human beings that we are who's in it? And how do we create structures and support where we can make it easier for people across the spectrum to raise families and be people who are like beautiful additions to the Jewish people?
Welcome to this episode of Your People Will Be My People, Conversion in a Post-October 7th World. Sponsored by Project Ruth. Project Ruth was founded in 2023 in order to formalize Orthodox affiliation for Jews of diverse and varied backgrounds, and to welcome those seeking Orthodox consensus to find meaningful connection to and understanding of Jewish life and practice. I am Rabbi Adam Mintz, president of Project Ruth, and I'm here with Meredith Bregman, community activist and leader within the Jewish community. First of all, let me say, Meredith, this has been an exciting couple of weeks for Orthodox conversions because President Trump, in his speech at the Knesset, actually, when he introduced his daughter Ivanka and his son-in-law Jared, he called out the fact that he said she loved Judaism so much that she actually converted to Judaism. So that was a cheer, a call out for Orthodox conversion right there at Knesset of Israel by the President of the United States. I'm absolutely positive this is the first time that happened.
Right. And then he said something like, and Bibi, you know, this wasn't in the cards for me. I wasn't sure what that meant, but yes. Who
I didn't know if that was good or bad, but we'll leave that as it is.
Right. But who knew that that Orthodox conversion would play an important role in public policy on the world stage? So
here you go. Now, today, we're going to try something different. Two episodes ago, we interviewed Eleanor Harrison Bregman. She had a remarkable story, an absolutely remarkable journey to Judaism. But we realize that these journeys to Judaism are not totally their each convert's own story. It's a story of other people who were involved in that journey. That's family, that's friends, that's rabbis, but it starts with partners. And so today we have the pleasure of welcoming as our guest Peter Bregman, who is a lot of things, but for us today, he is Eleanor's husband. So Peter, welcome to this episode of Your People Will Be My People. And why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and then a little bit about you, Eleanor, and the journey to Judaism.
And just to protect Peter's marriage, you're supposed to say at this point, Peter, the most important thing I am is Eleanor's husband.
I know. I was just thinking how nice it is to be described as, you know, we know all this stuff about Eleanor. You should meet her husband. This is like the way I'm identified is as Eleanor's husband, which, by the way, this is not the only place I'm identified as Eleanor's husband. And I'm very happy to be identified that way each time. So thank you for having me. And I loved listening to the interview that you did with Eleanor. And it's fun to be on the show. So guide me a little bit in terms of what you want me to share about myself.
First, just tell us your background, your Spanish-Portuguese background, your family background, and then we'll talk about Eleanor's journey and your part in that journey.
Okay.
Actually, I just want to say one thing, though, before you do, which is I had the pleasure about a month ago of hearing your mother, who Eleanor spoke quite a lot about in a really beautiful way, do the beautiful, Kohanic blessing at a community Shabbat service. And when I saw this beautiful, elegant woman get up and I realized who it was, I was very moved. So I'll let you. I'm sure that's going to play into what you say. Sorry to interrupt.
Well, yeah, and she did it in French because she's French. So I grew up in New York City. My mother is French. She was between 10 and 15 years old in France in hiding during the Holocaust. And my father grew up in New York, and his parents came over in the early 1900s as young children, moving from Russia and Poland from the pogroms. So sort of my, the sort of way I think of the impact that that's had on me is I've, in both in my mother's side of the family and my father's side of the family, which is not unique for, Jews growing up anywhere, and certainly not in New York, is that um, I grew up with this background. My father was not particularly religious in any way. My mother was much more so. My mother's Sephardic. My father's Ashkenaz. So we grew up with this sort of Sephardic Middle Eastern background. My mother's family before France was from Syria and then Iraq and then Egypt. And so there's this sort of strong Middle Eastern influence. I grew up in New York City. I went to a French school called Fleming, which no longer exists, but up until 5th grade. And then from 6th grade on, I went to Ramaz, which is a Jewish day school, modern Orthodox Jewish day school. I have two brothers. We're each a year apart. I'm the youngest, and then a year older is my brother Anthony, and a year older than him is my brother Bertie. And we all did the same thing. We all went to Fleming school up until 5th grade, and then Ramaz from 6th grade on. As far as I know, we were the only kids who joined Ramaz at a later time who had not previously gone to Jewish schools. So, like, we had to, pretend we knew how to speak Hebrew,
but you spoke French, so that was
and we spoke French, exactly. And when I speak Hebrew to this day, I speak it with a French accent. When I go to Israel and I'm speaking Hebrew, people think I'm from France, not from America. I went to the Spanish and Portuguese synagogue growing up. I was bar mitzvahed, at 13 in a top hat, which is the tradition there, very, very formal tradition. And actually, of everybody in my family, I was I kind of leaned more towards the spiritual than anybody else in some sense. Like, I went to services on Shabbat. Nobody else did in my family. We had a house in Elberon, New Jersey, and I would sort of walk to synagogue in the morning on Shabbat mornings, but by myself. I wore yarmulke for a while. Like, I was kind of into it. And I might be giving you too much information. I graduated high school. I went to college, and at Princeton is where I met Eleanor. When I was a senior, she was a freshman. I was leading outdoor trips. I went into Princeton very, very focused on politics, and I became disillusioned very quickly, and tried to figure out what to do, and eventually went on a camping trip by mistake. Fell in love with it. And then sort of that launched my career in leadership and outdoor leadership. And I met Eleanor on a trip I was leading to train people to lead outdoor trips. And like many, many things in our lives, she knew way more than I did about the outdoors, even though I mean, she actually had experience in, month-long expeditions in the outdoors, but I was the leader. And so I pretended that I knew more. And that's sort of been the history of our relationship, from 36 years ago to now.
So let me ask you, well, first of all, maybe just give us one brief nugget about what you do professionally. I think that would be just helpful for the context. And then I have a question based on what you just said.
Yeah. So I run a company that I've started 30 years ago, focused on leadership and executive coaching, and working with CEOs and government leaders. I work with prime ministers. I work with CEOs of a lot of different size companies, and leadership teams. And on the topic of leadership, I've written 5 books, and had a blog on Harvard Business Review and Fast Company and CNN, and talking about like how we lead and how we live.
Okay, so Eleanor, when you met her, was not Jewish, and given everything that you said leading up to Princeton, being Jewish was a big part of your life. Was this the first non-Jewish woman you dated? And was there anything in your mind about the fact that she wasn't Jewish when you obviously fell in love?
So not the first non-Jewish woman I dated, but I didn't date that many women seriously before Eleanor and I dated. I dated a few. We don't have to go into numbers, but not that many. But it was definitely, it wasn't an issue on the first day, but it became a topic of conversation. I don't think it became an issue because I don't think either one of us was thinking, in the first 3 months or 6 months, oh, we're going to get married. But it was a topic of curiosity. It was, we talked about it a lot. I was very interested and curious about Christianity. And I think she was curious about Judaism. But, it was, I remember a conversation I had with her early on where I said, and this is very early on, I said, look, you don't, so do you believe that like Jesus is God? Like, like God, like Jesus, the man Jesus that we know, the historical Jesus is like God. Like, do you believe that? And she thought for a minute and she said, well, not exactly in the way that you're thinking of it. Like it is more complicated in the way that you think of it, but not exactly in the way that you're thinking of it. And then she said, Peter, do you believe that like the Jews literally wandered around the desert for 40 years? Like they were lost and they were just wandering around the desert, not knowing where they were for 40 years while a generation died. And I was like, yeah, there's a whole book about it. I could show you. Of course it happened. What are you talking about? So I think like when we met, that was where we both were, like I think she was a little bit more sophisticated in how she was thinking about religion, and maybe I was a little bit less so.
So what happened?
By the way, I'm still not sure they weren't. I'm still not saying like they weren't wandering around the desert.
That's the right answer. We like that answer.
As I always say to my family when they say, why are we kosher? Well, and I always say, I would live the same life, whether or not I found out it were true. Something made us a people. That's all you have to focus on. Now, no, we're not going to bring that in the house. But from Eleanor's telling of the story, the fact that when you were serious enough to talk about marriage, I mean, we've met Eleanor. I know you both. We've met Eleanor. It's very clear why the two of you. She clearly is your beshert, as you are hers, and that was probably pretty clear at some point early on.
Earlier for me than it was for her, but yes.
Really? Well, that's for the next.
Well, we went out for a couple of years and then we broke up, and she broke up with me. And in part I had graduated. She was, in college. She hadn't really dated anybody seriously other than me. But when we were sort of talking about like, but I don't understand why we're breaking up. Like, we went to Hawaii right after we broke up for a 2-week vacation that we planned. And she said, well, because if we don't break up, we're going to get married. And I said, that seems like the worst reason to break up in the world. Like, like if we're going to get married, then maybe, we should get married. She's like, I'm not ready to get married.
But you knew early on for your parents and maybe specifically for your mother, that was a no-go for you to marry someone non-Jewish. Is that right? Or was it you yourself?
No. Well, I'm gonna be discerning about how to articulate this, because I knew that my mother was 100% against me marrying somebody who's not Jewish. From my mother's perspective, God saved her in the Holocaust in order to continue Judaism. And I was breaking that. Like and not, to be honest, not just my mother, but my brothers also, who kind of felt like, look, you're not being realistic if you think you're going to raise Jewish children and you marry somebody who's not Jewish. Nothing against Eleanor, but if you marry somebody who's not Jewish, statistically, your kids are not going to be Jewish. And that was their view. And that's what I was facing.
Now, did you bring Eleanor home in these first years?
Yeah, immediately. I mean, I did not. There was no issue with, and everybody, as far as I know, like really loved Eleanor.
Did your mother take you aside and say, but we like her, but you're not going to marry her?
No, it was just very, very obvious from the way we grew up that was the red line. But she did not say, oh, you're not going to marry. I mean, eventually we got into lots of those conversations.
And so what happened? So you broke up because she didn't want to get married. Then at some point she decided to get married, and therefore you got back together again.
Yeah, it was that simple and very, very quick, just like that.
Once you got back together, you were engaged.
So we continued to see each other when we were not going out. And I don't want to be explicit or inappropriate, but if neither of us were going out with someone else at the time when we were broken up and we saw each other, then you might think that we were going out at that time. We didn't lose connection in those 4 years. And then she came to New York and visited, and we decided we would give it a shot. And that was the beginning of 5 years of discernment. And we met with Rowley at BJ, who said, you should take an intro to Judaism class together. Peter should do it also. And you should go to therapy, couples therapy, to sort of talk about these things. And we went to couples therapy, and we spoke with the therapist for a while. And he said, look, Eleanor, you have thought through a lot of these things very carefully, and you have a sense as to where your lines are. And this was at the point where she said, "I'm not going to convert to Judaism, but I'm happy to have Jewish children, and we can convert the Jewish children." And she said, "And the two of you, your communication is terrific. You're open. You're honest with each other. You're caring, and there's not really an issue in terms of how you talk about these things." And then he paused, and I said, "Well, I guess then that leaves me." And he said, "Well, I just think you might benefit from a little therapy." And, he didn't necessarily use the words, but the tone was individuation. Like, I think maybe it would be helpful for you to have some individuation from your family. And so then I worked with him as a therapist for a while to kind of work through the issues myself.
And what was and I'm focusing only on your mother because Eleanor spoke a lot about her, and now I've seen her. What was your mother's interaction with you during this time? And, again, it's, as you said earlier, your family was like, okay, you think you can marry a non-Jew and have children be raised Jewish. That doesn't really make sense. But I think when people say that, I know that having the children converted at birth, right, was a big piece of, that was something I know I discussed it with you and Eleanor once, but was your mother upset? Was there breakus over this?
It's interesting as you talk about it. Yes, of course, she was livid. She was very upset. She was having a very, very hard time. It stressed our relationship a lot.
Did she come to the wedding?
But I want to say one thing first, and then I'll answer that question. Yes, she came to the wedding. It's interesting because I am not the most decisive person in the world, right? Like, I perseverate over difficult decisions. I think about things. Like, I just bought the iPhone 17. I don't know. Should I have gotten the 17 Pro? Maybe I should get 512 gigs instead.
So you're just Jewish, basically. Okay.
Like, I'm like a little neurotic, and I make these decisions, and then I second guess the decisions. And it took Eleanor and I a long time. We knew each other for 11 years before we decided to get married. And when we got married, in the end, there were a couple of times in between where I would ask her, she would ask me. Neither one of us was ready. And then when we finally got engaged, we were in Israel. The two of us were in Israel together. And I can't remember if she described this story in the previous podcast with you, but we were in Israel, and she brought me to the intersection in the old city of right where the Christian, Muslim, Arab and Jewish quarters meet, and Armenian, I guess. So it was like that one place where all four of those quarters meet. It's actually, if you've been there, a very, very ugly, like, gutter of a place. Like, it's not a celebrated place. It's literally, you find it on the map, and there's it's kind of, you're in a gutter hovel area. And then she asked me to marry her. So she asked, and the final time. And then I said, give me 30 minutes at the wall. Like, I want to go to the kotel. Let me just sit with this for 30 minutes. And then I said yes. And we didn't tell anybody. We told, like, the Verizon guy. Like, we didn't tell anybody, that would make any difference. Actually, we did. We had some Israeli friends we were staying with, and we told them. But other than that, we told nobody for like a month and a half. And we decided we were going to get married like the following July. And we ended up telling people in like October, I think. We came back in August. Maybe it was late September. We told people. And then there was a tremendous amount of pressure in the family.
To not get married, or to not get married?
To not get married.
And what about to have her convert at that time?
At that point, she was clear that she wasn't going to convert, and I was not asking her to convert. And we actually moved the wedding in November. We said we're going to move the wedding to January. So like I'm not worried about my relationship with Eleanor. I'm worried about my relationship with the rest of my family. And so we moved up the wedding to, instead of like whatever it was, June, July, August, whatever it was, we moved it up to a month and a half. And I basically said to my family, get it all right out now. You got a month and a half to do whatever you want to do, and then we're getting married. And and it was a good decision because as soon as we got married, things changed. What I want to say though, with my indecisiveness, is it's funny because this is like the biggest decision that there is to make, like the biggest decision in the world there is to make, and like none of the pressure. I mean, I cared about I love my mother. I mean, I'm, I was the one who brought her up to do the blessing of the Kohanim in French when I was there. Like she's at our house every night for Shabbat, every Friday for Shabbat dinner. I adore her. I didn't doubt that we would still have a relationship. Like I didn't doubt that, but there was never a moment. I mean, there was a moment for Eleanor where she was like, Peter, you're making a mistake. We shouldn't get married. There was never a moment where I felt like, oh, I'm making a mistake, or, oh, I shouldn't marry Eleanor, or this is going to be too problematic for my family. It was like never for a moment. I mean, like I have so much, I mean, Eleanor, I mean, you've met her, but she's such an amazing woman. And, I mean, I think she was nervous marrying me, but I think what that therapist said was very, very true, which is, and Eleanor said this to me at some point when she said she was like nervous about getting married, but then she thought, like, there's nobody I would rather, like, there's no way where a marriage exists without problems. Like, that's a fantasy. That's not the reality of a marriage. But she said, there's nobody that I would rather work through problems with, or that I've more faith can work through whatever problems exist, she said, than me. And what I would say is 100% the same for her. Like there was really never a moment of wavering, because I knew that Eleanor has the skill and the heart and the will to like work through these issues. And like, of course, we've had lots of issues, some of them religious, Jewish, Christian related, many of them not. But, in the end, like Eleanor is the one that I want to work through all these issues with, because I know she can meet me in that place, and I know I can meet her in that place. So that's a long answer to your question. Like, did I feel pressure from my family? 100%. Did that pressure make me waver in my decision? No, because I was committed to Judaism, I was committed to Eleanor, and I was committed to my family. And I wasn't going to let any of those. And by the way, Judaism failed me, and like the community failed me in many ways through this whole process. And my family did it, but it all came back together. I first of all, I applied to rabbinical school in I guess the early 2000s, and I got rejected from everything because no rabbinical school would accept someone who's an intermarried.
Even in a reform, not.
I had a conversation with the dean of the rabbinical school of HUC, who said, "Why would it's?" He laughed a little bit. I said, "Why are you laughing?" And he said, "Why would you?" Well, I actually asked him about the policy. He didn't know at the point, because my strategy was to just apply to rabbinical school and not tell people I was intermarried, have them want me, and then say to them, "Oh, by the way, I'm intermarried." And he said, "Why would somebody who's intermarried want to become a rabbi?" And I said, I'm surprised hearing that from a denomination where 50% of the people congregants are intermarried. Like, I would think that you would. And he said, well, it's not exactly 50%.
Is that still true? That policy?
HUC now accepts intermarried. I believe RRC now accepts intermarried.
Oh, they
also
do.
So that policy has been changed. But I thought Orthodox rabbis would be tripping over themselves to convert our children. I was wrong. It was actually much more challenging. Both Eleanor and I had to fight to really bring our children into the Jewish community in a way that they were accepted by everybody.
So let's talk about your children. So you started having children, and there was an understanding, Eleanor understood that you were going to have Jewish children. Did you discuss what that meant?
Oh, yeah. I mean, so Eleanor and Eleanor and I process things a lot, like we talk about things a lot. So yeah, we absolutely talked about it. And it's not how you just word it. Like she agreed. I can't remember exactly how you just worded it, but I want to, again, it's like subtle. It's not that she relented in the decision to have Jewish children. It's not like my view, we could have her back on and ask her, but it's not like she was like, okay, I don't really want Jewish children, but I want to marry Peter, so I'm going to give him Jewish children. That is not, at least my experience of how it was. It was a conversation that we had, and we explored it from every angle, and we looked at it, and we practiced Judaism, and I learned a tremendous amount about Christianity, which I'm actually very, very grateful for. And by the way, I'm more Jewish now because because Eleanor wasn't. I had to own my own Judaism in a very, very different kind of way than I would have to, where I could just abdicate it to, like the tradition that I grew up with and that the person I married grew up with. So it required a different kind of ownership over it and a different kind of understanding for me in my experience of it. And by the way, I'm not advocating for intermarriage or saying it's a bad idea. I'm not doing either one. I'm just talking to you about what the impact that it had on my experience. But it wasn't that Eleanor lost the negotiation. It was that we agreed together that we wanted to have Jewish children. Now, would it have been easier for her with her family to have Christian children? Probably. Would it have been easier for my family if my wife were Jewish when we got married? Probably. But we sort of talked about all these things and what's the kind of home we want. And we created our own ketubah. And it's a very long ketubah. And it talks about, the ways in which Eleanor's culture is very much a part of our family, because she was not at the time just Christian, but also Southern. We spent a lot of time down south. We lived down south for a little while. Like, it was very important to me that our children grow up with a really deep connection to the land in down south that Eleanor has. And it's not like I conceded that because she conceded the Jewish part. I wanted that for our children. I think the same way she wanted our children to grow up as Jews. But it was a process.
Just give us the short version of the first child, and the rabbi pulled out at there was some crazy story.
So the rabbis got involved, and they didn't make it as smooth as you and Eleanor had kind of talked about it or planned it.
I mean, I thought they would be so happy to have our children. I was wrong. But it's interesting. Like, I was wrong because they also didn't believe that we would raise Jewish children. And from an Orthodox perspective, and I'm curious to get your perspective on this, but their view was, look, your children as non-Jews are not a problem, halachically, theologically. But if they become Jews, then they are responsible for all the Jewish halachot. And if we don't think that they will actually live Jewish lives, then we're setting them up for a theological failure. We're setting them up to be responsible for something that they are not yet responsible for. We're setting them up to be responsible for something that they will fail at, and we're hurting them by converting them. It's actually a very a position with a lot of integrity in a certain sense, that says, like, we believe in this, and we believe that when we convert them to Orthodoxy in Orthodox Judaism, that they are responsible. And if we think that they're not going to live up to it, we don't want to put them through that. We don't want to put the scar on them, in a sense. And like, I appreciate it now more a little bit than I did at the time, because I'm like, dude, just convert my children. but it became more difficult. So at the time, the rabbi that we went to originally was not willing to do it. We went to someone else affiliated in the synagogue. He was not willing to do it. We went to the rabbi that I grew up with in Elberon, New Jersey, the summer house that we had, and he agreed to do it. And then when we got there, he had, and he said, I think Eleanor described this, but he said to Eleanor, study with me for a while, and she did. And then when we got there on the day of the conversion with my parents there and everything, he wanted us to sign something saying we're going to like send our kids to Jewish day school and we're going to do this and that, like nothing that we'd ever talked about. In the end, it wasn't a problem. Like those were all things that we were planning on doing and that we had said, but it felt like an ambush and it felt weird. Like the whole thing felt kind
And
of
you
strange.
wanted an Orthodox conversion because you were Orthodox. You see, you have to add that because that adds to the complication because you were Orthodox intermarried and you wanted your children to be converted
Well,
Orthodox.
would you self-identify at that point in your life as Orthodox, or was it more, Peter, that you wanted to make sure there would never be a question
Right.
for
Okay.
any of your
So
children?
both very good questions. I don't know that I ever self-identified as Orthodox. I grew up Sephardic. There is no Orthodox, Reform, or conservative in Sephardism. Like you go to shul, and the shul is, practices halachically, but you might be one of the many people who stops the taxi at 72nd Street and walks the 2 blocks to 70th Street, or you know,
When you get out the subway right at 70th Street.
yeah,
Either way.
and
I don't know what you're talking about.
but there's no like judgment about it. I mean, there is, like, we judge ourselves, but no one else is judging us because everybody's doing whatever they're doing. But the context I always had, I never went to a conservative or reform synagogue. Every synagogue I went to was halachic synagogue. But, like today, we skied on Shabbat, which, by the way, I would argue there's nothing halachically wrong with skiing on Shabbat because the lift is like a Shabbat elevator and you're wearing your poles.
I have it all figured out.
I got it figured out. So
your skis will be my skis. That can be your next podcast.
As the rabbi who invented the Shabbat elevator said, one of my favorite Jewish halachic quotes of all time, if God made loopholes, he meant for them to be used. So I don't know that I self-identified, but my practice, my sense of how things should be done was Orthodox. And if I wasn't doing them, I was falling short. I wasn't like living up to my theology. My theology was it should be Orthodox. In fact, I would argue kind of still that's my theology. You look at what halakha might say about being gay. I don't agree with that, there's like a number of things I don't agree with, but I tend to, when I look at the big halachic major issues, I tend to think I'm not practicing the way I should. But mostly it was the passport. Mostly conversion was a passport, and I wanted to know that that there would be nobody in the Jewish community that would question whether my kids are Jewish. And in fact, when I was in Israel with the kids and I got into a big fight with the soldier who was in security, who's trying to figure out, this was like probably 20 years ago, and trying to figure, Eleanor and I were there and Isabel was there with us. She must've been 2 or 3, and trying to figure out like, who are these people? And finally I just said to her, look, you're asking every question. If you want to know if my wife is Jewish, ask her if she's Jewish. You don't have to she speaks Hebrew, she practices blah, 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 but you're still trying to figure out, ask her. And so she goes, okay, are you Jewish? And Eleanor said, no. And I said, but our kids are. And then the soldier goes, no, they're not. And I get into this huge fight with the soldier about going, absolutely, they were converted Orthodox, blah, blah, blah. And like every good story in Israel ends, we have this fight, we go back and forth. And then I said, okay, now that you've fought with me, we're in the back of a very long line. Will you bring us to the front of the line? And she said, no problem. And she brought us to the front of the line and we cut the line. But like, that's I've had this argument with so many people, but I think it's changing.
So, I mean, there's a lot to unpack here. We could just do a series of podcasts with you and Eleanor and all of that. I mean, when I first, heard Eleanor's story and got to know you guys, it's within the context of Heschel, right? Your kids were at the Heschel school, and I knew that Eleanor was not Jewish, but it was clear you were a Jewish family and you had Jewish kids. So I guess all of the kids were converted in an Orthodox conversion, correct?
Yes.
And I guess I wonder, was there any point where your kids pushed back at you and said, well, why are we doing all this when mommy's not Jewish?
No. I mean, there was never a point. Look, the kids went to Chabad for preschool. And these are some of the great things about the Jewish community. Like once our kids were Jewish, once they were converted Orthodox, nobody questioned anything. Like our Chabad asked at one point, can we see the conversion? We showed them the conversion. They said, great. Eleanor will tell you, neither one of us was ever treated differently by Chabad. I've never felt any of that. When we were at Heschel, never treated differently. I don't think, once, and also the world changed from when we did it. We've known each other 36 years. We've been married, 37 years now. We've been married like 26 years. It was a different world too. Like the world is different. And I think people are accepted in different ways and people understand. Look, Eleanor was the director. Eleanor was a reverend on staff in a synagogue, right? Like that doesn't happen that much. So
not much. That doesn't happen ever.
At all, right? That doesn't happen ever, right? Which speaks to like Romamu's vision around this. And it also speaks to like the fact that there's lots of people who are in interfaith, multi-faith relationships who are very interested in being connected to Judaism and having their kids connected to Judaism. And so I think the Jewish world is catching up to the reality of certainly the American dynamic of Judaism, the Jewish American dynamic. But our kids were never questioned themselves. We can ask them. We can have them on the podcast.
That'll be the next round.
That'll be the next round. They see themselves 100% as Jewish. They are not afraid of Christianity in kind of the same way I was. Like I kind of grew up a little afraid of Christianity. They have a fluency with kind of understanding various worlds that I'm very proud of. And they do it all from like a very clear sense of Judaism, not only Judaism, but Zionism. Like our kids are super Zionist. They're very, very strong in Judaism. And over the past couple of years, to watch the strength of my family and the larger family, my brother's kids and my brother's family, it has made me so proud to look at like how strongly our larger family were, when my father was alive, we were 20 of us, now we're 19. And the strength with which they understand, believe in, everyone's been in Israel, several nieces are spending the year in Israel now, and super connected. And that makes me really proud.
I just want to talk for 1 minute about this idea of I like to call it a blended family. And that means, and that you say the Orthodox rabbi couldn't deal with that because he said, when they're not Jewish, it's not our problem. But if you're going to convert your children and your wife's not Jewish, then it becomes our theological problem. So I just want to say that in the 1800s in Germany, they did have blended families. In Germany in the 1800s, what you had was the Jews for the first time became citizens. They weren't living in the ghetto anymore. They became citizens. And all of a sudden, these Jewish men could marry non-Jewish women, and they loved the idea. And, like every relationship, it wasn't Peter so sophisticated. They made a deal with the wives. They say, listen, we'll have children, and all we want is that the children should be circumcised and they should have a bar mitzvah. And you don't know how many volumes of rabbinic literature have been written about that deal. Now, that was a deal. I mean, she was not interested in Judaism in any way. And the truth is that the husband wasn't interested in Judaism either. But he came from a Jewish background, and I'm sure he had Jewish parents. And he said, the kid will be circumcised, the kid will have a bar mitzvah, and everyone will be happy. And there was a huge debate among the rabbis whether they should do that and, whether that is a way of recognizing these blended families. So when you talk about the rabbi in Elberon and, the fact that, he was uncomfortable with that, so he's really uncomfortable with something that was literally 150 years earlier. It was a phenomenon that had happened, that many years before. Because in the United States, you didn't have such a thing. You had a Jewish man in the 1950s who, went to college, fell in love with a non-Jewish woman, and she converted. Either she did convert or she didn't convert. If she converted, then the children are Jewish. And if she didn't convert, the children weren't Jewish. There was no blended family. There was no sophistication. So you and Eleanor, not only have an amazing story, but you're really setting a model, a standard for how we, and here I say even the Orthodox rabbinate, is willing to deal with families such as yours. And what you prove is that the old-fashioned models and the old-fashioned families who have the deals between husband and wife, that's old-fashioned. That was fine for Germany 1840. But in the, as we begin the 21st century, these relationships are much more subtle and much more complex, and that we're creating some of the best Jewish families from these kind of complex relationships. And I would agree. I think that we're the community is coming to embrace that. I just want to give credit for one thing, then I'm going to be quiet, and that is Chabad is remarkable. Chabad will not convert. The Lubavitcher Rebbe was big into Jews being observant, but everybody needs their focus. He was focused on Jews. He didn't want to focus on non-Jews. That was beyond his purview. So basically, their view is we're not going to do conversion, but find yourself a rabbi who'll convert you. Once you convert, we accept you like you're ours, and we don't ask any questions. And that's really a wonderful story that they never asked any questions.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, I think I have loved Chabad actually, because I look at them in my kids' colleges, and they do a brilliant job in bringing Judaism to people, and bringing people to Judaism in a very beautiful way. There's some complications, but our experience of it has been great.
Your kids are involved in Chabad in their different colleges.
Well, one of our oldest daughters graduated, and there was not really a Chabad. She went to Colby, and there was not a Chabad there. There was a Hillel, and she was very, very involved in the Hillel. Sophia, who's a junior at Princeton, is very involved with Chabad, and she's on the board, and she's very connected. And our youngest Daniel is still at Heschel. So, like it or not, he's very involved in Judaism. He goes along with it. It'll be very interesting for me to see how he engages with Judaism when
he thinks about college in terms of the Jewish atmosphere, the Zionist atmosphere in college. Is that part of his consideration?
Less than the other two. But I think outwardly he doesn't. But I think as he visited colleges, I think it's actually an undercurrent. I think if you asked him, he would say, no, it'll be fine no matter what. Wherever I go, it's going to be fine. He's looking in the Northeast, basically. But I actually think I think he does. I think he's taking into consideration in a way that he may not even recognize that he's taking it into consideration.
So I have a question. I mean, Adam, I'm really glad to hear what you said, because I always say to people, you don't have to be Jewish to have a Jewish family. That's what this model, right, was. Eleanor is raising, until she became Jewish, Eleanor was a non-Jew, married to a Jew, but raising a very serious Jewish family. And she told us why she came to this decision herself, which was very moving. And of course, after October 7th, where, she described, it didn't happen to someone else, it happened to me. I'm part of this people. It was very powerful. How did, was there any shift in anything from your family, your mother, for you, for your children? I mean, one of the things that I found most moving about the story is that after you went from the conversion ceremony back to your home, where there was a chuppah and many of our mutual friends, and you were, I'm assuming there's another ketubah now,
yeah.
Which I found that incredibly moving. So did anything change? Was there a sense of, for example, relief on your mother's part or on your uncle's part, or is everything the same? Like, how did her decision and your beautiful willingness to give her the space, it wasn't like you had a long view, oh, I'll let her do it on her own time, right? This was her decision. Has it changed anything?
It's a great question. We'll start with my mother, for whom it was like, her response was, now everything that I've wanted in my life is I have. And we're like, hold on. Like, you're like, no, it's not like now's your time to leave. Like, you're still with us. Like, we need you. but her sense of like, my life is complete now, like all of my children, and she really sees Eleanor as one of her children, like all of my children are Jewish. And we were aware of that. And I think part of Eleanor's thinking was she's ready and she wants to move it along, because we want to make sure that Eleanor absolutely did not do this for my mother, but also understood the gift that it is to my mother. And she was very, Mama and Eleanor are very close, and she wanted to be able to give her that gift. It was beautiful. The ceremony was beautiful. The mikvah was beautiful. The wedding actually had a bigger impact on both of us than we thought. We went on a honeymoon, which was really fun. So first of all, when Eleanor originally had this conversation with Mark Baker on October 6th, when October 7th was happening and she was in Boston, I didn't know that she was having the conversation. She had not talked to me about thinking about converting to Judaism. And I remember when October 7th happened, how hard it was for me, and how much, and we had this conversation, how much I was scared to say it to her, because I didn't want ever to, because I really had no need for her to be Jewish at this point in our lives at all. But I wanted her to be Jewish. Like my world got so much smaller after October 7th, and has continued to be smaller in a sense. Like it's a weird thing, especially if you were sort of in the liberal, political world, and then like how quickly everything switched and people turned. I don't know, my world got much smaller. And like I felt like I'd been planning for this. I'm the guy with two passports kind of thing. Like I Holocaust, pogroms, blah blah blah. It's like it's just we're waiting for it to happen in our generation. So I had that feeling. But what I want to say is like it was not a simple, easy transition for me. Like I have thought about Eleanor as a Christian for 36 years. Like I was fine with it. Like we have built a beautiful family. Like I adore Eleanor, and I learn from her, and I'm we've run interfaith couples workshops together. We have it's that was her identity. I wasn't expecting her to convert to Judaism. I don't think that I have not seen anybody change anything of how they relate to her. Like, I think there's an appreciation of the fact that she's Jewish now within the Jewish community, and people are overjoyed to have her as part of the Jewish community in a different way. I think she was always part of the Jewish community, just differently. But there's a way in which I'm still getting used to it. Like, not that I don't love it. I love it. Like, I love that she's Jewish, but I still find myself thinking of her, and I'm very aware when someone says something about Jews versus Christian. I'm like very aware of that, because I've been aware of it for 36 years. So I wouldn't change it for anything. And I didn't need it or ask for it, and I'm delighted. And it's still an adjustment for me in some ways, because
Like, give us an example. So it's an adjustment, meaning it's like your head exploded, right? Or
yeah, it's just like I'm like, it's not an adjustment in a complicated way. It's an adjustment where she's lighting Shabbat candles, and in my head, I still have in my head somewhere like she's a Christian woman lighting Shabbat candles. She's not. She's a Jewish woman lighting Shabbat candles. I don't know if I could express the difference of that. There's like some kind of difference in that. When
did she light? She wasn't lighting candles as a Christian woman, though.
No, she was lighting candles. She lit Shabbat candles our whole, like the way we always did. When I think about, like, I say Kiddush because I say Kiddush, it occurred to me, like, Eleanor could say Kiddush. Like, I think I always said it because I was the Jew in the family and I say Kiddush, but Eleanor could say Kiddush. Like, these are just new facets of the relationship that it's not immediately obvious to me, because for 36, 37 years, we've been in a different pattern.
That's so interesting.
It's not that I forget, but it's not top of mind, because again, I wasn't playing the long game. I mean, I'm playing the long game in my relationship with Eleanor and our family, but I'm not playing the long game and like, yeah, eventually she'll convert. Like, that was just not a part of what I was thinking.
Wow.
And it's really nice. But it takes me a beat sometimes to remember, because she was really, at one point she said, and I probably latched onto it more than was necessary, but she identified herself as a questioning Christian and a practicing Jew. This was probably 20 years ago. And she really has been a practicing Jew for the last, 30 years. She's been a practicing Jew. She's, at least for the last 20 years, she's been fasting on Yom Kippur. Like, she has been practicing as a Jew. When it came time for her to convert, the rabbi, who knows us very well and knows our family, knows Eleanor, did not say, "Oh, you need a 2-year process to make this happen." He said, "Let me know the date that works for you." Like, you're already Jewish. You've been living as a Jew for 25 years. And so, but she's been living as a Jew for 25 years, but a different kind of as a Jew than the as a Jews that we talk about. Like, she's like, like as actually as a Jew, but she hasn't been Jewish. And so for me, it's just a little bit of a shift. It's interesting because her work, which she is remarkable at and does really well, she was doing it as a minister, working with couples and now she's still working with couples and interfaith issues. And she's working not as a minister though now, but as a Jew. And it's the same, like, she's doing the same work. There's subtle, I don't know, shift. And I don't know in what way. I don't think there is in the way that she works. But in my mind, takes me a beat to make the shift.
Wow.
Obviously, we could go on all day.
No, I think that's the perfect place to
We could have gone on with Eleanor all day. We can go on, Peter, with you all day. That's the perfect place, because I think that identifies the remarkable story, Eleanor's remarkable story, your remarkable story with her, the remarkable story of your parents, of your mother specifically, of your children, of everybody, of the rabbis who helped you along, of the of your rabbi for so many years, who was able just to say, what day is convenient for you. For me as a rabbi, that's such a wonderful story. But at the same time, these examples in the world that we're living, as we educate that world, it's not so smooth. And there's always, it's not as if you stood under that chuppah or you went to the mikveh. Eleanor went to the mikveh and all of a sudden everything changed. The light switch went on. Light switches in life don't go on just that way. And I think that's a wonderful, wonderful way to conclude. So thank you, Peter.
Wait, can I say one more? I'm going to interrupt you.
You sure can.
Yeah,
go. Take it away.
Because I am Jewish. I don't need the last word, but I do need to say one more thing. Which is, while we did have parts of the Jewish community we had to fight, we also, and I really want to say this because it's a really important piece of this, Rabbi Angel, who at the beginning said, "I can't convert Isabel," at the end said, "I'll convert Daniel." And when we said, "By the way, would you also convert Isabel and Sophia, because we want you to be the conversion," he said, "I don't need to. They're Jewish. They're converted." And we said, "Yeah, but we still want you to." And he did. And so, like, to me, that is also a story of the Jewish world, which is I think we are all learning to say, how do we create this vibrant Jewish community with the multiplicity of human beings that we are who's in it? And how do we create structures and support where we can make it easier for people across the spectrum to raise families and be people who are like beautiful additions to the Jewish people. And for me, I feel like, we worked our way through it over the past 30 years, but it is a beautiful story in that way. And I feel like the Jewish community has come around and is coming around in a way to make that possible. So I felt like maybe I want to make sure I'm not bashing the early side of the Jewish community too much. Because
we appreciate that, and we thank you for setting such a wonderful model, and that our children and grandchildren will look back at your families. You've developed your family as a model for so many families going forward. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Meredith. This has really been a treat.
And by the way, you have to see Eleanor and Peter on the dance floor.
Okay, that'll be the
amazing.
next podcast. Amazing.